Amazing turn of events. Black man exposed hidden injustices and surprising transformation as judge. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow as he moved through the empty courthouse hallway, his mop trailing behind him like a forgotten dream. He was well known for his infectious smile, brightening the dull legal stones of this small Georgia town. But beneath that facade was a heart heavy with worry. Each day, as he balanced the responsibilities of supporting his aging mother and younger sister, the dream of law school felt like an unreachable star, obscured by the clouds of economic struggle. As Marcus began to clean the courtroom's mahogany tables, he noticed a dusty file peeking out from underneath a neglected stack of old paperwork. Curiosity knotted his stomach, but he hesitated. Should he follow his instinct or ignore the impulse? A flicker of dread ignited within him. With a quick glance around, he reached down and pulled the file closer. His heart raced as he flipped through the yellowed pages. Each word was a damning testament to the systemic injustices laid bare before him. Detailed stories of wrongful convictions, of friends who had once placed their trust in the very system that betrayed them. Caught in an agonizing moral quandary, Marcus's pulse quickened. Should he report this? What would happen to his job, to the little income that supported his family? His mind spiraled with thoughts of Mr. Williams, the retired judge who had always seen potential in him. "You have a voice, Marcus," he'd said, "and the power to make waves." But now, with the weight of this revelation threatening to crush him, Marcus wrestled with doubt. The fear of losing everything he had worked for battled against a deep yearning for justice that surged within him like a tidal wave. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The internal conflict consumed him. Images of his mother's worn hands and his sister's innocent laughter played in his mind, heavy with the ache of responsibility. He couldn't fathom standing idly by while lives were ruined. His friends were living reminders of the cost of silence. Yet the insecurity of his situation clawed at him. What if this decision led to homelessness? What if turning over that file cost him his home, his safety, and that flicker of hope inspiring him to dream bigger? Then in the midst of this harrowing turmoil came the unexpected twist. A recognition for Marcus, a call inviting him to serve as a judge. The sense of disbelief was staggering. Could he really rise to such a position? An unprecedented chance, but with it, he felt the crushing weight of responsibilities. Could he navigate this new terrain filled with landmines of expectations set by those who doubted him? As he stepped into his new role, each gaze in the courtroom bore questions. Was he capable? Was he ready to confront the very injustices he had discovered? The fear of failure wrapped around him like a vice as he prepared to wield authority. Hope and dread danced together in his heart. He was no longer just a janitor. He was now a judge, poised on the brink of redefining justice for a town grappling with division and prejudice. But could he balance his family's expectations with the newfound demands of his position? The future stood uncertain before him, a canvas blank, yet streaked with shadows of doubt. What awaited him in the days to come? Would he rise? Or would the very system that had once overlooked him pull him into its depths? Marcus stood at this perilous threshold, a storm brewing within, resolved to fight for justice, but aware that the path ahead might lead him into a darkness he could not predict. Marcus adjusted his tie, beads of perspiration forming near his collar as he faced the courtroom's wooden bench for the first time. The sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting a warm glow that felt at odds with the icy grip of anxiety clutching his chest. As he sat down, the weight of the gavel seemed heavier than ever. This wasn't just ceremonial. It signified responsibility. The embodiment of power mingled with the fear of inadequacy. He glanced up from the bench, noting the curious eyes of the audience before him. There lay the community he had once cleaned for, now seated in an uncomfortably silent courtroom, awaiting a judge they had not expected to see. The moment felt surreal, like stepping into a world crafted in the confines of his imagination, but now palpably real. Would they trust him? Would they see the potential Mr. Williams had recognized, or would they only perceive the janitor who swept their floors? A case file caught his eye. It was the very file that had ignited his internal battle days prior. Though it lay unopened, its presence loomed large in his mind. He could almost hear the silent screams encapsulated within those pages. What if, while navigating through this new role, he could bring those injustices into the light? Procedures, rules, guidelines, these were his tools now, and with a firm resolve, Marcus decided he would not shy away from them. Today would be a low-profile case, a minor dispute between neighbors regarding property damage, yet he was acutely aware that this would set the tone for his career. With every word he uttered, he felt he was forging his identity, slowly climbing from the foundations built through hardship. As he began the proceedings, he quickly learned to rely on his innate understanding of people. Their pain, their joy, their stories resonated with him deeply. He listened carefully, employing the empathy he had long nurtured while mopping floors. The complainant's voice quivered as she described her plight. Marcus could genuinely feel the injustice tied to her experience. By the time he delivered his preliminary judgment, his heart beat in tandem with a growing sense of purpose. His decision was just, considering the nuances of the situation. To his surprise, he felt an unfamiliar satisfaction solidifying within him. Yet he couldn't shake the restlessness. His mind kept circling back to the file. Days passed in the courtroom, and while each ruling filled him with a sense of accomplishment, it also grew increasingly evident that the systemic issues he had uncovered were not merely forgotten relics. They were alive, entrenched in the very cases he was now presiding over. As he made judgments, he was acutely aware that some decisions perpetuated the same cycles he was desperate to disrupt. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Marcus returned home and found himself quietly contemplating in his dimly lit living room. His sister blared music from her room while his mother dozed on the couch, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. Torn between his responsibilities and what felt like a calling, Marcus traced the edge of his desk, pondering the file's fate. Should he take a stand? But at what cost? Weeks into his judgeship, as the case backlog piled high, he was thrust into a complex trial involving a young man wrongfully accused of theft, another shadow of the haunting file. This boy was a familiar face from his childhood, and the whispers of defeat clung to him as he stood trial. The boy's eyes screamed for redemption, and in that moment it dawned on Marcus. He had a unique ability to not only listen, but to interpret the unspoken narratives hidden behind indictments and testimonies. The time had come to face a pivotal decision regarding the treasures unearthed from that dusty file. Would he act on his knowledge, risking everything he had just earned, or remain a hopeful spectator locked behind the bench? A subtle yet resolute voice deep within Marcus pushed him toward the truth, leaving him teetering precariously between hope for justice and the fear of the repercussions that lay ahead. As he braced himself for the courtroom's next hearing, he couldn't shake the feeling that a confrontation with the very injustices he yearned to rectify was imminent, his judgment now overshadowed by the weight of his growing conscience. What action would he take as the lines between personal stakes and professional integrity began to blur? Marcus rubbed his temples as if the physical pressure could relieve the weight of the decision ahead. The courtroom buzzed, the murmur of colleagues blending with the rustling of papers. He could feel their eyes on him, not just out of scrutiny, but, he hoped, curiosity about the direction he would take. He had to act, but how? The restitution the young man sought was not just about clearing his name. It was a crack in the larger facade of an unjust system. In the early dawn of the next trial days, Marcus began categorizing the emotions swirling within him. Determination coiled tightly within his chest, urging him to expose the rot that lingered beneath the surface. Yet doubt hovered just out of reach, whispering that he had too much to lose. The thought of stepping outside the role defined for him, of falling into disrepute among his peers, sent chills down his spine. But the injustice he felt festered, unrelenting, gnawing at his integrity. During lengthy morning sessions, his mind wandered beyond the text of the case. It lingered on the stories he had hidden away. The injustices of his past were no longer distant memories, but painful reminders of the stakes involved in this trial. He knew he was capable of generating change if he chose to leverage his position. While awaiting the opening statements for the upcoming trial, Marcus turned his pen over and over, recalling every detail of that dusty file that had ignited his journey. Names, faces, stories, they demanded to be heard, cried out for redemption. At the morning meeting with fellow judges, Marcus found his voice anchored by the weight of responsibility when he finally spoke up. "I believe we should re-examine some of our past cases. There have been too many wrongful convictions, clouded by negligence or limited evidence." Gasps resonated through the room, and eyes darted suspiciously. He could almost feel the needles of judgment piercing him. "What are you suggesting, Marcus?" one of them challenged, a hint of patronizing disbelief in his voice. "I'm suggesting that we make it our duty to uncover the truths. What if we could right some wrongs?" Despite his quaking hands, the words tumbled from his lips, raw with passion. The judgment that poured from their eyes mixed with intrigue and ridicule. Yet he remained resolute, his heart pounding to its own rhythm. Days turned into weeks, and each ruling he delivered felt increasingly like a dance on a tightrope, balancing justice and personal integrity. Meanwhile, the trial of the young man loomed ever closer. With the boy's innocence hanging in the balance, Marcus felt the weight of the past and present converge. Every decision carved the path for his future, and each ruling was a flicker of courage or retreat. As night descended, Marcus spent hours poring over the case, his desk littered with evidence and memories. He discovered connections between his own life experiences and the testimony of the young man sitting before him. That realization ignited something fundamental within him, the ability to transform moments of despair into opportunities for collective healing. The courtroom, he mused, could serve as a platform for that transition. He envisioned bearing witness to reparative justice, charting a course that wouldn't merely react to past injustices, but reshape future possibilities. This resonated deeply within him, almost like a revelation of sorts. But before this vision could materialize, an unexpected call from an old acquaintance shattered his contemplative solitude. When he answered, he wasn't prepared for the urgency laced within those words. "Marcus, you need to know something. There's more to the case than what's in the files. There's something hidden that could change everything." As he absorbed the gravity of what he'd just heard, Marcus realized the stakes had escalated far beyond his own journey. With conflicting emotions spiraling within him, he understood that this could be either a chance to protect or to expose the very foundation of the judicial system he had fought to join. As his heart raced, he leaned closer to the phone, fully aware that the path forward would not only shape his own destiny, but would resonate through the lives of many others. Would he dare to embrace the chaos brewing beneath his carefully constructed world? The answer seemed just around the corner, waiting for him to pick up the pieces and confront the unseen truths awaiting discovery. The light from his desk lamp flickered ominously as Marcus paced his small office, the weight of the call still heavy in his mind. Who could have uncovered new evidence about the case? And more importantly, was it credible? He grappled with the responsibility that was now thrust upon him. The clock ticked with a relentless rhythm, echoing the urgency to make a decision that could either uplift or shatter lives. He needed clarity. Instead of succumbing to the anxiety swirling within, Marcus settled into a chair, clutching a piece of paper filled with handwritten notes regarding the young man's case. Even in the dim light, he could discern the names of witnesses he had earmarked for questioning. He began mapping out a strategy, focusing on the connections he could leverage to not only defend the boy, but also to unveil the truths hidden beneath layers of institutional incompetence. To the world outside, he was a respected judge. Within, he fought a tempest of doubt. Could he prove something larger than this singular case? Could he become an instrument of change? The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with a familiar air of anticipation. But today, the energy felt charged, like the air before a storm. Everyone expected the usual routine, the same dismissals and rulings that had often felt hollow to him. Yet as Marcus entered, he stood straighter, his breath steadying as determination surged within him. He was no longer just an arbiter of the law, he was a seeker of justice. As he took his seat, a sudden yearning for authenticity enveloped him. He glanced at the young man awaiting his fate, a silent plea emanating from his entire posture. The life hanging in the balance was not the only thing weighing on Marcus. It was his own conscience that begged for validation. He opened the session, but instead of diving right into the proceedings, he paused. "Before we proceed," he said, voice steady yet warm, "I request a brief recess. There are matters of grave importance that we need to examine." Shock rippled through the courtroom. Judges did not usually call for personal recesses without prior contemplation. The murmurs swelled, buoyed by surprise and speculation. Marcus was acutely aware of the eyes on him, some filled with disbelief, others with curiosity. He could feel the anticipation roll through the room. He stepped away, seeking solace in an empty courtroom. Alone with his thoughts, he considered the ramifications of his next move. This was not just about the boy. It was his chance to reshape the very fabric of the legal system he served. But how deep did the corruption run? Would he crack open a Pandora's box that could engulf not just him, but also colleagues he had long admired? Taking a moment, he closed his eyes and pictured his childhood, the shaping moments that had forged the man he was now. Hardships etched into his memory were stark reminders of the differentiators in the justice he had observed. With new resolve, Marcus resolved to confront the panel of judges not merely as a participant, but as a catalyst for truth. In that moment, he embraced the risk. The personal stakes escalated, but so did the urgency to reveal the systematic flaws. Re-entering the courtroom, he felt different, empowered. His voice rang out against the silence, steady but filled with clarity. What if our system isn't just flawed? What if it is, in critical ways, complicit in the very injustices we claim to oppose? The air shifted, charged with uncertainty. For Marcus, this was no longer just a trial. It was the genesis of a movement, a battle, not just for one life, but for countless others, silenced by indifference. As murmurs filled the room, he could sense the atmosphere teetering between approval and outrage. The moment he had summoned was here, and he stood on the edge of a precipice, ready to jump. Would his audacity reshuffle the cards, or was he merely lighting a fuse set to explode? With the undeniable pulse of change thrumming within him, he prepared for the inevitable fallout. The time had come to face whatever lay beyond the horizon of familiarity. What awaited him on the other side could ultimately redefine his identity forever. Marcus steadied himself as he faced the assembled courtroom, the overwhelming gravity of his words hanging in the air like fog. The murmurs gradually faded into a tense silence, every pair of eyes focused on him, some with disbelief, others with hope. It was clear he had awakened something in them, a flicker of possibility. He took a deep breath, drawing on all the resolve he had mustered moments before. "We are not just here to pass judgment," he declared, his voice gaining strength. "We are here to seek the truth." The weight of his own statement settled on him, and he sensed a shift within himself. No longer was he merely a vehicle through which the law flowed. He was unearthing the very justice the law often failed to capture. As he looked out at the crowd, lawyers, family members, witnesses, he felt the spark of a collective consciousness rising, one that demanded acknowledgement of the flaws he'd dared to confront. The tension electrified the room, igniting his passion and pushing him to dig deeper into the issues that had plagued him for years. Too often, we look away from our own shortcomings. We dismiss those who challenge the status quo, labeling them as troublemakers, he continued, his gaze fixing on his fellow judges at the front. But what if we were to embrace those challenges? What if we dissected our processes, questioned every source of evidence, every protocol, without letting fear hinder us? Could we finally create a system that serves justice, rather than merely upholding tradition? The murmurs resumed, this time mixed with nods of agreement from unlikely corners of the room. He noted their reactions, a blend of discomfort and excitement. For many, this was new territory. The foundations they had long trusted were being rattled. Despite the urgency he felt, an undercurrent of doubt began to swirl inside him. He envisioned the risks ahead, backlash from peers, skepticism from the media, resentment from those who might feel threatened by a call for transparency. But wasn't it worth the risk for the sake of true justice? He feared not the potential fallout, but rather the feeling of complicity he'd endured for too long. Then he remembered the boy's face, drawn tight with anxiety, vulnerable yet defiant. It was the innocence of youth against a machinery that often disregarded humanity. "This isn't just about one case," Marcus asserted, letting his heart bleed into his words. "This is about each and every life, impacted by our decisions, about the trust that holds this system together. It is broken, yes, but it is also redeemable." He punctuated his statement with a newfound commitment. "Let us not shy away from uncomfortable truths. Let us instead face them together." His words resonated, igniting a mix of defiance and determination amongst those present. But as he stood there, he glimpsed the hardened expressions of colleagues who had once been friends, judges who had long dismissed whispers of corruption as conspiracy theory. How would they respond to his call for reform? Would they rally to his side, or would they go on the defensive? Doubt crept in. He could feel the undercurrents of fear manifesting around him, self-preservation fighting against the desire for meaningful change. As the session drew to a close, Marcus felt invigorated, yet apprehensive. Instinctively, he knew he had crossed a threshold. But what lay ahead weighed heavily. He had uncovered the potential for transformation, not only for the system, but within himself. Yet the road ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. The moment felt pivotal. The dawn of change could cradle him or cast him into darkness. With resolve settling back into his bones, he dared to think ahead. What would be his next step in confronting a system he had begun to expose? As the gavel presided over the proceedings, he steeled himself for the battles ahead, knowing that the confrontation had only just begun. The stakes were escalating, and he could hear the heartbeat of his journey, a call to action against complacency that would echo long after he had spoken. Yet a single question reverberated in his mind like a drumbeat. Would his unraveling reveal a path towards justice, or merely lead to his downfall? The corridors of the courthouse felt different the next day, charged with an energy that was almost palpable. Marcus walked through the marble halls with a renewed sense of purpose, but also a knot of tension tightening in his stomach. Every glance from a colleague felt scrutinized, every whisper felt pointed. The weight of his words from yesterday had not only reverberated among the crowd, but had clearly reached the walls, igniting reactions that were as varied as the audience he had faced. In his office, he tried to focus on the briefs piled high on his desk. The papers that once seemed mundane now felt like relics of a previous life, a life where he had adhered strictly to protocols without question. He flipped through the case files but found his mind wandering. A deep frustration bubbled beneath the surface. He could no longer trust the established practices that he had once believed to be infallible. This self-doubt was new, uncomfortable. Yet as he stared out of his office window at the bustling street below, he quietly reflected on the transformative moment he had sparked. The glimmers of agreement he had seen were intoxicating, but he knew there were battles brewing. Willing to embrace the discomfort, he realized he needed to fortify his resolve, not just for himself, but for those who were counting on him. Marcus decided to convene an informal meeting with a few trusted colleagues. Judges, he figured, might have been leaning toward reform. Though he felt nervous, dismissing this impulse felt like complacency. He'd rather face potential rejection than regret inaction. Finding a time when only a handful of them were available, he nervously sent a group text inviting them to lunch, choosing the nearby cafe where they had often shared casual conversations. The day of the meeting arrived, and he paced outside the cafe, grappling with both excitement and apprehension. They arrived one by one, casual greetings masking the tension that simmered beneath. As they sat down, the light chatter grew sparse. He could feel their eyes settling on him, waiting for him to lead the discussion. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice wavering slightly but gaining steadiness as he continued. "I had some thoughts after yesterday, and I believe we're at a crossroads. I want to explore the possibility of starting an initiative aimed at increasing transparency within our courtroom proceedings." The room felt thick with air as they absorbed his proposal. Murmurs started again. Some voiced their concerns about backlash, while others debated the implications of increasing scrutiny. Marcus was taken aback by both support and hesitance. Even the few allies he believed he had seemed unsure. "I've been thinking about the innocence lost in our cases, particularly in light of our recent discussions. We can no longer ignore the red flags we pass daily," Marcus pressed. "Yes, it will be difficult, but shouldn't we fight for integrity, for a system that honors justice over tradition?" His colleagues exchanged glances. He could see some minds shifting, wrestling with the call for reform against their ingrained skepticism. It was exhilarating, but terrifying, and as he spoke, he realized his efficacy as a leader would be dictated by his ability to confront their fears head-on. However, beneath his growing conviction lay an incessant whisper of concern. What if he lost their trust? What if their doubts overpowered his push for change? He caught one colleague's skeptical gaze lingering on him. The level of discomfort in the room intensified. Minutes turned into tension-filled hours as they weighed his suggestions against an array of practical concerns. Yet, as discussion flourished, Marcus sensed the tiniest spark of enthusiasm igniting within some as they presented ideas of their own. That spark was fragile and unfurling. It required more than conviction. It would take strategy, patience, and possibly more sacrifices than he initially envisioned. As the meeting came to an end, a quiet determination nestled within him. Change was a slow burn, he understood, often traversing unkind paths riddled with conflict and hesitation. But as he aimed for the glimmer of solidarity he'd witnessed, he knew this was just the beginning. Yet just when he felt a flicker of hope, a troubling thought crossed his mind. Had he truly calculated the risks of the change he was trying to instigate, or was he hastily drumming up resistance that could shatter their tentative unity? Determined to keep moving forward, he left the cafe with more questions than answers. Who would take up arms with him in this fight, and how far would this push transform him? It was clear Marcus was poised at the edge of a precipice. He was no longer just a judge, but a catalyst for an uncertain future, and at that very moment the stakes in his quest for justice began to climb even higher. The following morning found Marcus staring unseeing at his laptop screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat in the silence of his office. He had entered into uncharted territory, and the implications jammed in his throat like a lump that wouldn't dissolve. He questioned his resolve as he recalled the mixed responses from yesterday's meeting. The burden loomed heavier than he anticipated, transforming his desire for reform into a weight of responsibility. He pulled up the emails that had been waiting for his attention, but his thoughts drifted back to a troubling realization. Even if he succeeded in rallying a change among his colleagues, the public's trust had already frayed. Would they even heed a judge who recognized the flaws in the system but had thus far contributed to it? The creeping anxiety prompted him to grab his coat and step outside for a moment. He needed fresh air, a reset. The sharp breeze greeted him, whipping up the ambition that still flickered within. Marcus walked the streets, blending into the rhythm of the city, the steady thrum of cars and chatter drowning out his doubts, if only just. He navigated through the crowd until he found himself outside a local community center. Feeling an impulse he could not ignore, he stepped inside. The center radiated a warmth that contrasted sharply with his recent dread, as families shared laughs and children played in the corner. He approached a group of people gathered around a table littered with pamphlets about criminal justice reform. The discussions here were raw, unrefined, and real. In moments, he was drawn into their dialogue. There he felt a sense of community that had eluded him in the courthouse. Listening, he began to understand the magnitude of the challenge before him. The narratives of people who faced bias from the system far outweighed any philosophical ideal he clung to. He encountered the sharp stories of mistrust toward judges like him, layered with anger and frustration that demanded reform, not just in procedures, but in perspectives. Each story served as a mirror to his ambitions, vivid reflections of why he needed to dislodge the chains binding justice. Meeting their sincerity provoked a weighty question within him. What kind of judge did he want to be? Was he satisfied to be a mere arbiter, or did he need to use his platform? This thought struck deeper than any courtroom argument ever had. If he wanted to champion transparency, he also had to expose the systemic issues that had long been ignored. As the discussion wrapped up, an unanticipated sense of purpose surged through Marcus. He may have come seeking clarity, but what he found was empowerment. Their passion became his guide, illuminating the path ahead. He realized that engaging with those affected by the very system he served would create a foundation of genuine trust. It was an opportunity to connect on a level so pivotal it could challenge all preconceived notions of the law and its implications. Back at his office, newly invigorated, he began drafting a public forum announcement, aiming to open a dialogue between the judiciary and the community. But doubt still flickered, intertwining with his excitement. What if his efforts were met with backlash? What if it did not resonate with the broader community or even his colleagues? Marcus wrestled with the weight of his decision throughout the afternoon, still teetering on his precipice, yet he could not shake the gathering momentum swirling around this initiative. As the day wound down, the realization settled within him. He could no longer remain confined to the cloistered world of the courtroom. Action was required and would echo louder than any speech he ever gave. Yet even as he constructed the announcement, a flicker of fear ignited within him. Had he fully prepared for the moment when the community confronted him with their grievances? The prospect loomed ahead, tantalizing and terrifying. The clock ticked down, and with every passing minute he felt the urgency building. Was he courageous enough to embrace the uncertain, to be the judge who stood for change, not just behind the bench, but alongside those he pledged to serve. Tomorrow would bring clarity, but for now, Marcus knew that the hardest conversation had yet to begin. Marcus awoke the next morning, the pale light filtering through the window like a solemn reminder of his resolve. He dressed slowly, each button alone, feeling like an act of defiance against the weight of his conviction. The hours before the public forum ticked by so slowly that it felt as though he were waiting for judgment rather than an opportunity to engage. As he walked into the courthouse, he was painfully aware of the double-edged sword he was wielding. Today was not just a chance to voice his intentions. It was his moment of vulnerability. The whispers of doubt crept back in. Had he bitten off more than he could chew? What would his peers think when they learned of his decision to stand before a sea of community members, opening himself up for scrutiny? Despite the unease, there was an undeniable spark of determination. The faces of those he had met at the community center flashed in his mind, each one a reminder of who he was fighting for. He stepped into the packed courtroom, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. He sensed the weight of gazes on him, their hopes, their skepticism. A sharp inhale steadied him. "Thank you for being here today," he began, his voice steady but reverberating with the tremor of vulnerability. "I invited you to this forum because I believe it's time we begin a conversation about transparency, resilience, and reform." As he spoke, he felt a transformation within himself. Every word was deliberate, each phrase a brick paving a new path toward justice. He acknowledged the flaws within the system, narrated the need for reform with honesty that shattered illusions he hadn't realized he had maintained. The room was heavy with silence as he paused to invite their thoughts. It was an unanticipated moment of shared vulnerability. What followed was overwhelming. Community members stepped up to share their stories of discrimination, judicial neglect, and deep-rooted fear. The raw emotion in their voices struck a chord within him. It became clearer how desensitized he had been, reading legal briefs and arguing points of law while ignoring the human toll of the very system he represented. These individuals were not just statistics. They were invaluable threads woven into the fabric of his purpose. Yet as each story painted layers of systemic failure, a wave of guilt washed over him. He wrestled internally with the reality of having been part of the problem. What kind of judge was he if he had allowed oneself to remain blind to these injustices? Suddenly, a voice cut through his reflections, a woman who spoke with both fierceness and pain. "You're talking about change, but how can we trust you when judges like you have failed us so many times before?" The tense air rippled. Her question was a gauntlet thrown down at his feet. It demanded a response he had not anticipated. It stripped away the thin veil of authority that he clung to, exposing the raw truth of accountability. Feeling every eye upon him, the anxiety surged anew, yet a clear thought crystallized in his mind. Perhaps this moment was not simply about delivering a speech for change, but embracing the very foundation of justice: dialogue. "I cannot demand your trust," he replied, voice imbued with sincerity. "I can only share my commitment to earn it, starting with listening to you, engaging with your concerns, and paving a path forward together." In that instant, Marcus understood. He was not just a judge, nor merely an authority figure. He became a participant in this dialogue, a man willing to confront his past and shoulder the burden of reform alongside those he had inadvertently hurt. As murmured agreement stirred in the audience, the shift within him was palpable. He was stepping beyond the confines of his position, and it felt exhilarating. Yet, even amid the awe of this awakening, the sinister thought lingered. Was he ready for the fallout? The very action he took in this room might invite adversaries amongst his colleagues, ones who had thrived in the status quo. With the weight of that realization pressing down, Marcus felt the urgency intensifying, knowing that the questions demanding answers would not fade away. Would he be able to hold the line when the system fought back against someone daring to enact real change? The moment was dawning. He silently anticipated the decisions crowding ahead. How would he navigate the backlash when his own colleagues would likely view him as a traitor? The time had come for his true test, one that could either solidify his future or dismantle his professional life altogether. The days following the forum stretched out like a tightrope over an abyss. Marcus found himself walking a precarious line between newfound purpose and doubt. Each interaction with his colleagues became a deliberate examination of their reactions. Eye contact lingered. Was it acknowledgement or disdain? In cabinets and hallways, whispers bounced off the sturdy walls. The air was thick with tension, yet he steeled himself against the nagging anxiety. He began to strategize. How to navigate meetings with other judges who were staunch defenders of protocol. He prepared himself with facts about reform, wedging personal experiences between statistics and precedent. Yet, every time he opened his mouth to speak, he felt a flicker of hesitation, as though the voices from the courtroom were still echoing in his mind, demanding authenticity and careful not to repeat the indifference of the past. Then a scheduled meeting arrived where Marcus was to participate in a round-table discussion. Attorneys and judges gathered, their faces a mixed palette of familiarity and intimidation. He could feel the currents of judgment radiating among them, judging his rise from complacency to activism. When he presented his ideas, a flash of defiance ignited with each assertion that the judicial processes needed recalibration. This was his moment, an opportunity to create ripples within the staid waters of tradition. Judicial reform isn't merely a legal fix, he stated, his voice escalating with fervor. It's a commitment to remind ourselves of the humanity involved in every case. The nods he received were tentative, mixed with skepticism, not agreeing but fearing to openly oppose. The room crackled with the weight of silenced discomfort, and there, within that quiet tension, he saw his own reflection, a mirror to his previous self, a judge who had perpetuated silence rather than spoken out. To the esteemed head judge, a man who had always regarded rules as sacrosanct, Marcus posed a challenge. What are we willing to lose in order to stand right in the face of injustice? His own heart raced as his voice gathered weight. The other judges exchanged looks, their unspoken agreement rising like steam from a simmering pot. Certainty will not always accompany us on this journey toward reform, Marcus continued passionately. But can we afford the certainty of our past practices? He sensed behind his words the ghosts of those vulnerable voices from the forum, the stories that ignited his conviction. Little did he know that this moment was crystallizing, soon mirroring how he'd transformed from a passive observer to an active changemaker. Afterward, as he stepped back, a hush settled in the room, the kind that felt heavy with future implications. The head judge nodded slowly, as if processing a proposition that had until now remained unchallenged. The potential for change begins with you, Marcus, but do you recognize the storm you're inviting? His heartbeat quickened at the implication in those words. The revelation was profound but alarming. He hadn't considered how isolated he might become, facing a system resistant to change. Yet striking a chord within him was the realization of hidden resilience, an ember smoldering beneath layers of self-doubt. In the days that followed, Marcus embraced the chance to engage further. He dove into literature on judicial reforms, began meeting with advocacy groups, and even sought chances to train his colleagues on implicit biases. This engagement was not without its struggles. Each encounter with resistance or mockery took emotional tolls. Yet every wrinkle of doubt that appeared on his brow hardened his resolve. He questioned, the more he strove to create a more equitable system, the more would he confront his colleagues directly. Then came the email. The subject line ominously contained one word: urgent. As he clicked open, dread pooled in his stomach. It was from an old colleague, an ally, now turned adversary. "Marcus, we need to talk. You may be risking your career. Don't make enemies inside the courtroom." There it was, his crossroads. Would he cower beneath the looming threat, or would he solidify his stance and continue the fight, prepared to face the storm? One option promised safety, while the other promised integrity. Pausing, he realized his path forward was tethered not just to reforming the law, but reforming himself in a way that confronted not only the enemies outside, but also those he once regarded as colleagues and friends. What Marcus didn't know was that the journey would soon lead to a confrontation that would test every ounce of resolve he had built up and bring his deepest fears into stark reality. Would faith in reform outweigh the sacrifices he had to consider? Marcus awoke to the sound of his alarm clock, the first light of dawn illuminating his small bedroom. It was the day he had been preparing for, an intense public hearing regarding cases of wrongful conviction, a chance to present evidence collected that could lead to tangible reforms in the judicial system. Yet beneath the surface of excitement lay a current of anxiety that threatened to engulf him. He had been on a trajectory of transformation, evolving from a janitor wielding a mop to a judge advocating for justice. But the cost of such growth was becoming painfully clear. He dressed with precision, each garment a reminder of his professional status. Yet with each layer, he felt the weight of expectation piling atop his shoulders. The parallels of who he once was and who he had become felt closer than ever. Would he still carry the same passion for justice once he faced those who had turned against him? Arriving at the courthouse, he felt the familiar tension in the air, a blend of justice-seekers and skeptics bottled within the walls of the courtroom. This wasn't just a typical case. It was a crucible meant to test ideals, both judicial and personal. As he stepped into the courtroom, a hushed murmur swept through the gallery. There were whispers about his reputation, his bold assertions about reform that had stirred controversy among his peers. Seating himself at the bench, he fought to steady his resolve. Marcus knew his role was crucial, but there was a gnawing fear that he would be met with hostility from those who felt his actions threatened their authority and way of life. Still, the weight of determination settled within him as he recalled the outstretched hands of those seeking justice, the faces of victims seeking acknowledgement. As the hearing began, he positioned the case files before him, trying to focus. Witnesses testified about the harrowing experiences following wrongful convictions, ordinary people whose lives had been irrevocably altered. With every heart-wrenching account, Marcus felt the pulse of purpose surge through him, a reaffirmation that justice was not a mere concept, but a living, breathing necessity. Yet, even amid the raw emotion, there was backlash waiting in the wings. Once the last witness stepped down, Marcus prepared to deliver his verdict. Feeling the air thrum with expectation, he cleared his throat. "Today, we have gathered to not only acknowledge the pain experienced by those wrongfully convicted, but also to commit ourselves to prevent these injustices from happening again." Every word he spoke reinforced the essence of his conviction. He would no longer be a passive participant in the system that had silenced so many. But as he continued, the room crackled with palpable tension. One of his colleagues, a judge with considerable experience but little patience for perceived insubordination, interrupted him. "Are you really prepared to undermine the very foundations upon which our judicial system stands, Marcus? How do you expect your colleagues to trust your judgment if you challenge the status quo?" The challenge hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown at his feet. Marcus felt a wave of doubt wash over him. The room held its breath, all eyes riveted on his reaction. Had he truly considered the implications of his stance? Could he stand firm when the storm bore down on him, or would he falter under scrutiny? Gathering his resolve, he met the challenge head-on. I am not undermining the system I serve. I'm advocating for its integrity. Blind adherence to tradition is what has allowed these injustices to flourish. Our role as judges is to uphold the law, yes, but also to seek justice for those who have often been overlooked. A murmur spread through the gallery, echoing the camaraderie he felt with the individuals who had shared their stories. They were not mere cases. They each represented a facet of his evolution, a testament of resilience that was worth fighting for. In that moment, Marcus understood. This wasn't solely about having the audacity to stand against his peers. It was a promise to humanity that he would not shy away from risk. Yet just as his confidence surged, an unexpected wave of resistance crashed into him. Whispers began circulating among the judges, their doubt infectious. "You put your career on the line for a reform that many believe is unattainable," another judge mused ominously. "What will you do when you are unsupported and isolated? Will you abandon us or rise against that loneliness?" He felt the heat of their scrutiny. The fear they projected mirrored his own insecurities, but in the remnants of doubt lay his personal awakening, a visceral determination to reshape the very system he had entered. "I am fully aware of the cost of forging a new path," he replied, the strength in his voice rising to meet the challenge. "And I am prepared to face that cost, because those who struggle deserve to feel heard, and those who have the power to create change owe it to them to act." In the days that followed, a contrast began to emerge between those supportive of his efforts and those resistant to change. The backlash he had anticipated arrived in the form of covert measures against him. Some colleagues plotted to weaken his influence, while rumors circulated to undermine his authority. But amidst the chaos, his growth became evident. He learned to engage in dialogue, to articulate his beliefs with both tenacity and empathy. Each moment forged his identity deeper, intertwining professional aspirations with personal accountability. It was no longer just about winning cases, but winning hearts and minds. Finally, the day came when Marcus received formal acknowledgement from the legal community, an award celebrating his dedication to reform. It was an astonishing recognition, and as he stood before the gathered assembly, the weight of his transformation dawned upon him. He was no longer a janitor disguising his past. He was a champion of justice, anchoring reforms not only for the present, but for future generations. In the concluding chapter of his journey, Marcus embraced the visceral feeling of achievement, a melding of gratitude with grounded confidence. The applause that echoed within the hall underscored another hard-earned realization. True fulfillment is forged not just through recognition, but through the unwavering commitment to grow and transform alongside others. Reflecting on his journey, he recognized that real success was never solely about titles or accolades. It was about the courage to confront adversity, to act with integrity, and to champion those who remained unheard. An unwavering part of him had emerged, no longer bound by fear, but driven by a passion for justice that would not allow complacency to reign. His voice, once merely a whisper among the halls of injustice, now resonated loudly with authority, power, and purpose. As he descended from the stage, wide smiles and nods met him from those whose voices he had fought for. The path ahead remained ripe with challenges, yet he no longer felt stifled by them. He felt empowered to validate their stories and determined to break the cycle of injustice, a true testament to his evolution. And with that, the storm clouds began to part just slightly, allowing the sunlight of transformation to shine through, bright, illuminating every corner of his newfound identity. As you reflect on Marcus's journey and the importance of advocating for justice, remember that your participation is vital in creating compelling stories that matter. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories that fuel transformation. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and create waves of change. Comment below your reactions and thoughts about the ending. Your engagement drives this community forward. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness this conclusion. It's the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to uplift the voices of personal, overcoming stories that reshape us all.